Good afternoon, everybody. Just getting you ready for it there. Bonjour à tous. That's the French out of the way. How is everybody doing? Good. OK, so ecosystems are everywhere. And just like it takes a village to raise a child, or more than a village for my child, it takes a whole ecosystem to lift up a social innovation. So you all have a role to play. At ChangeNOW, and this, I just heard, is the most attended ChangeNOW in history, at its very core, its raison d'être is about cultivating, nurturing an ecosystem of change. And that is what today's session is all about. It's a topic very close to my own heart, and through my work as co-founder of ChangeMakerXchange, where we're building an ecosystem for young social innovators and change makers. Let's have a look at what ecosystem we have in this room. Can we maybe see who are the non-profits, people representing non-profits? Put your hands up. OK. Let's see who we have in social enterprises, green enterprises. A couple here as well. Who's on the investor, funder side? OK. Gathered in this corner over here. Any media people? OK, cool. And any public sector? Awesome. So we have the full spectrum here, and that is what ChangeNOW is all about. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker for today, someone with vast experience building entrepreneurial ecosystems. He's the CEO and the founder of the Unreasonable group. I'd like you to welcome to the stage Daniel Epstein. Welcome, Daniel. Stage is yours.
Right. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Nick, for the warm welcome. And thank you all, to each and every one of you, for lending not just your eyes and your ears, but hopefully your minds and your hearts throughout today's conversation. My name is Daniel Epstein. I am founder of an organization called the Unreasonable Group. And I feel a debt of gratitude to each of you. And I feel like I should pay a favor for it. And that is to explain why Unreasonable. Why is our organization called such? The individual behind me, this is the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw, and he is famous for saying that the reasonable person adapts themselves to the world. The unreasonable one persists in adapting the world to themselves. Therefore, all progress depends on unreasonable people. If George Bernard Shaw is right, if all progress depends on unreasonable individuals, then it is our belief that we can't afford not to bet on the world's most unreasonable people, and I'm going to tell you a couple of their stories today. But before we talk about defining progress in our time, I think it's always important to look to history for context. A friend of mine shared with me two photos that I would love to share with you to frame up the conversation around change. This image was taken in 1900 on Easter morning in Manhattan on Fifth Avenue. The question is, as you look at this image, you can see the horse-drawn buggies and chariots, but can you see the automobile? There is one automobile in this image, and if you look closely, you will find it here. What I love about this image is if you go back and you read the headlines that were written at that time by the journalists and by the pundits, what you will see is that they thought the automobile was a monstrosity, and it would never replace the beauty and the simplicity of the horse-drawn buggy. It was too complicated, it was too expensive, it was too messy, it was too loud. And yet, what happened? If we fast forward 13 years, second photo I'm going to share, also taken on Easter morning in 1913, also on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. And the question is, can you see the horse-drawn buggy? If you look closely, it's conveniently located almost in the same location. What happened? In 13 years, you saw a complete shift of a market. In Manhattan, you saw an 81% adoption rate from the horse-drawn buggy to the automobile. And this was despite a lot of challenges. You had to build an auto and oil industry from scratch. You had to redo the entire infrastructure for the roads, for the automobile to be able to function. You had to train an entire generation of workers in a new complex machine, not just how to produce it, but how to fix it. Beyond that, we had to create new industrial processes like the assembly line, and we were gearing up to fight World War I. And yet we saw 81% market adoption of a new disruptive technology that everybody thought was going to be impossible. This is maybe best articulated as the S-curve of technology adoption. Many of you are probably very familiar with this graph. It represents what happened in Manhattan in the early 1900s. You had an incumbent technology, which is the solid line. That was a horse-drawn buggy, and it was replaced by a new disruptive technology, in this case, the automobile. And typically, S-curves, they start out really slow, they go really fast, and then they kind of even out. But something is unique about the times that we're living in today. This graph was made by, there we go. This graph was made by BlackRock, the largest financial asset management firm in the world, and it shows from 1900 to 2010 how new technologies are replacing incumbent technologies and the rate of that change. In the early 20th century, it used to look like an S-curve. Today, it now looks like a straight line. This is cause for both alarm and optimism, and I'm going to walk us through the positives and the negatives of the time that we're living in now, because it is, by a fact, the most disruptive technological time that we've ever faced as a species. So what is the upside? I'll tell you a couple stories of some of the technologies and entrepreneurs that we get to support who are using these new bleeding-edge technologies to take us into a better future. This image is of AeroFarms. They are based on the east coast of the United States. This is the largest indoor hydroponic farm in the world. It's 400 times more efficient than traditional agriculture. That means what would take 400 hectares, they can do in 1 hectare. They can do this without soil, without sunlight, with no pesticides, no genetic modification, and 99% less water use. Now, when you talk about vertical and controlled farming, what's beautiful is you can do it anywhere. So this is another company that we support. It's underneath the streets of London. It's called Growing Underground. They're taking old World War II bunkers. They're about 150 meters below the surface of the streets in London, and they're converting them into hydroponic farms as well, feeding the people who are walking the streets directly above them. It's 0-kilometer food systems. Another company I'd love to share is Andiamo, also using advanced technologies, but in the space of healthcare, they're using 3D printing to print orthotics and prosthetics. They can do it at 1/100th the rate of traditional orthotics and prosthetics. It is cheaper, it is more beautiful, and it is more customized, as you can tell in this image. Going over to Boston, across the Atlantic, this is a company called Alteros. They're using autonomous aerostat blimps, which I know is a lot of words. What it means is they're putting wind turbines into the jet stream autonomously, where the wind currents are much stronger and consistent to take us into a renewable energy future. If we're talking about renewable energy future, solar and wind are critical, but there are also really bleeding-edge technologies looking at fusion. Fission is how we've thought about nuclear energy to date. Of course, it's very dangerous. There's nuclear fallout as a potential. With fusion, you don't have that risk. And in essence, this company is recreating the center of the sun at a steady state. They can get plasma to 50 million degrees Kelvin. They're getting closer and closer and closer to an abundant clean energy future. And as we talk about a more regenerative future, we have to talk about transportation. And of course, electric mobility is a big part of the answer, but it's never the only part of the answer. This is the first car that a company we support called River Simple out of Wales created. It's called the Tabla Rasa, and it is a hydrogen cell-powered vehicle. With 1 liter of hydrogen, this can travel 300 kilometers, and the only thing that comes out of the exhaust pipe is purified drinking water. And speaking of drinking water, we still have nearly 1 billion people who live today without access to clean drinking water. One of the entrepreneurs we're really privileged to support, their company is called Source. This is an atmospheric water generation technology. So they use a solar panel to be able to pull humidity out of the air to create clean drinking water. They can do this with 3% humidity, which means any desert in the world where people live, they can now have enough clean drinking water for a household with 1 solar panel. And really, these companies are just getting started, so there's reason to be optimistic, but there's also reason to be pessimistic, which is why oftentimes we feel both. And anything that reflects light, casts the shadow. So what is the downside of this disruptive change? We all know these numbers, and I think we can feel them in our body. In 2013, Oxford came out with a study. Many of you have probably read it or seen this headline, where they predicted that half of the jobs that existed in 2013 won't exist in 2035. They're now rewriting those numbers, and it's looking more likely that about 70% of the jobs that existed in 2013 won't exist in 2035, and that's because of the advent of generative AI, and it feels different. We're used to knowing cognitively what it's like to be on an exponential curve in terms of technology, but we've never actually felt it in our bodies, and I think this is the first time that we are really feeling it. And this is best shown with this graph. This shows the rate of user adoption of new software platforms. ChatGPT went to 100 million new users in 2 months. We've never seen technology move this quickly. What that means in terms of job placement, wealth inequity, and social political unrest is very real. Back in my home country, back in the United States, we know that the 3 wealthiest people have more wealth than the bottom 50% of the country. We can't continue on the trend lines that we are on because of technology. And one of the few graphs that is as exponential as the rate of change with technology is the rate at which we're dumping carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. So we have to do something different. And this is why at Unreasonable, like many people in this room and at this gathering, this is why we believe so much in entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs, as we all know, have a curiously warped perspective. Where most of the world sees issues and market failures, entrepreneurs look at the same thing, the same dynamic, and they see solutions. But then they have the courage to will those solutions into existence and to dedicate their life's work towards that end. So what I'm going to do in the remainder of my talk is actually use the most ancient technology that we have amongst humankind, which is storytelling. I'd love to dig into the stories of just a couple of the entrepreneurs that we support, and then at the end of this presentation, invite you to join us and support their efforts as they look to bring us into a more regenerative world. The first entrepreneur I want to introduce you to is Dr. Jennifer Holmgren. Jennifer was actually a retired biochemist executive. She was living in the mountains of Colorado, which is where I call home, and she got a call from a scientist in New Zealand, and she said she couldn't turn her back on the new breakthrough, on the new science, and on the new discovery that scientist shared with her. What he shared made her realize that what we see as a market failure, which is pollution or waste, doesn't have to be, and that this can actually become a resource and it can take us towards full circularity. We started to support Jennifer and her company. It was called Lanzatech in 2016. This was their first pilot plant. This is in Guangzhou, China. This is a steel mill. And what you can see is there's nothing being emitted into the atmosphere. What would normally be coming out of that smokestack, in this case, would be carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. But instead, they're liquefying it, and they're putting it into this silver tank back there that looks like you would brew beer. They've bioengineered microbes that can eat carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and methane and convert it into ethanol. You can then take ethanol and you can convert that into polyethylene, which is materials for plastics and fibers, or you can convert it into jet fuel. So fast forward to today, this same plant that was just a pilot in 2016 now looks like this. This steel mill, with the installation of Lanzatech's technology, is the equivalent of taking 100,000 cars off the road every single year. For those who have a financial mind, the payback period on installing this technology for the steel mill is 2.5 years, which means after 2.5 years, they paid for the cost of installation, and then this company is profiting off of what was formerly pollution, and they're turning it into a resource. It's important to acknowledge that none of the entrepreneurs we support would realize their full potential were they not collaborating not only with investors and with mentors, but also multinationals. And in this case, Lanzatech ended up partnering with Boeing and with Virgin Atlantic, and about 3 years ago, they flew the first ever airliner, commercial airliner, flown across the Atlantic on jet fuel that was made entirely out of pollution, 100% recycled carbon. They've now spun out a new company called LanzaJet. They've taken the company public. It's a multi-billion-dollar business positioned to eliminate 3% of greenhouse gas emissions, one entrepreneur. They also partnered with a number of fashion brands. Last year with Zara, and they released the first ever dress that is made 100% out of recycled carbon, what would have been pollution into the atmosphere. So they're really taking us into a circular future. Another entrepreneur I wanted to share the story of, his name's Xavier. He was studying at Oxford. He decided to take a trip to East Africa to understand some of the challenges on the front lines. And what he realized is This is the reality for about 750 million individuals living on the African continent who don't have access to electricity. They tend to use kerosene lanterns for lighting in the evening. Every man, woman, and child who is in a household using a kerosene lantern experiences the equivalent of smoking 2 packs of cigarettes every single day because of the fumes that come off of kerosene. It is also inordinately expensive. Up to 20% of their income is spent on kerosene for lighting. The entrepreneur in this case said in 2012 that this problem, this market failure, can be a solution. They dedicated their life's work towards solving it, and they launched a pilot. Every yellow dot on the screen is a new household in 2012. This is in Tanzania that was converted from kerosene to solar. When great ideas are matched with technology that is appropriate, we can see remarkable change. Today, at Unreasonable, we support 4 entrepreneurial companies working on distributed solar. They have now brought solar to over 250 million individuals. That's 4 times the population of France, and they're just getting started. Another entrepreneur I'd love to introduce you to, this is Dr. Uma Valeti. Grew up in poverty in India. For his 9-year-old birthday, they had a big celebration, and in the front of the house, they were eating goat. He then snuck behind to the back of the house and saw where they were slaughtering the same goat that they were eating. He became an instant vegan, really overnight. He went on to become a doctor because he wanted to help humanity in any way that he could, and he ended up at the Mayo Clinic. Uma is very smart. He was one of the youngest cardiologic surgeons at the Mayo Clinic, and when he was there as an adult, he realized this problem of consuming protein for humans is much bigger than just his 9-year-old birthday. Today, we raise and then slaughter 80 billion, that's 80 billion animals every year for human consumption. When we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, when we talk about land use, when we talk about just animal rights and the morality of what we're doing, it's all called into question. And so Uma was performing open heart surgery where he was doing a stem cell transplant to repair tissues after a cardiac arrest for a patient. What dawned on him was, if I can use stem cells to grow heart tissue, why can't I use stem cells to grow meat without the need to raise and kill the animal? Fast forward, he launched a company called Upside Meats. This is the first in the United States. This was the first cell-based chicken breast. And today, they've been able to work with very large actors in this space, both Tyson and Cargill, the 2 largest meat companies in the United States, to really take this to market. Last year, they got FDA approval, the first company in the world to do that. And sooner than later, I think the next generation, factory farming will be a thing of the past. They will look at it as a blemish upon human history because of innovations like Upside Meats and what Uma is bringing to the market. Last entrepreneur I'll talk to you about is Luciano Bueno, an amazing individual out of Brazil who also looked at this idea of cell-based agriculture, but not from a protein production, but from a materials production standpoint. And what he really initially wanted to go after was cotton. For those of you who don't know the statistics around agriculture at large, about 80% of global deforestation is a result of agriculture. 70% of our fresh water is consumed by it. And to make a shirt like this one, which is made out of cotton, takes on average 2,700 liters of water just to make this single shirt. That's enough water to be able to provide clean drinking water to 1 person for 2.5 years. Cotton in particular is riddled with chemistry. This shirt, seed to me wearing it, takes on average 2,000 chemicals to produce. So Luciano looked at that and said there has to be a better way. How can we use this new technology around cell-based production and apply it to agriculture? And the first crop that he went after was cotton. His approach is 500 times more efficient than traditional agriculture. It uses 99% less water, and it is the only way that the world has ever seen to produce 100% pure cotton with no chemical additives whatsoever. And it looks, well, it actually doesn't look like this, but you can imagine it looks something like this, 100% pure cotton. And of course, he's partnering with large multinationals to bring this to market. You'll be hearing about these partnerships soon and the products that you buy. H&M and Ralph Lauren are 2 who joined him on this journey, and his team. And what I wanted to say, if anybody is an investor in this room, if you want to join Luciano and our team at Unreasonable on the journey, you can actually invest directly into the company. We're structuring a special purpose vehicle. Sam Walton, the founder of OpenAI, Bill Gates' venture fund, Breakthrough Energy, they're leading the round, and we want to make it accessible to the general public to be able to invest in solutions that will take us to a better future. So that is active right now. If you go there, you can definitely join us. Today, we're supporting just shy of 400 companies. They're operating in over 180 countries and territories. They're headquartered in over 60 countries. And these entrepreneurs are doing what we formerly thought was impossible. 389 ventures. They've generated just shy of $14 billion in revenue. In the last 3 years, they've raised more than $14 billion in financing. They're supporting the jobs of nearly 1 million people. They're impacting the lives, most importantly, in a measurably beneficial way of 1.5 billion people. Almost half of the entrepreneurs we support are badass women, CEOs. It's something we're very proud of. And they're really just getting started. In terms of action against climate change, these nearly 400 entrepreneurs have mitigated over 280 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. That's a very hard number for us to understand. So I plugged this into AI before my talk. Just to give you some comparables, that's the equivalent of 10 years of CO2 being absorbed by 2.8 billion trees. That's more than double the number of trees in England. That is every household in Paris eliminating their entire carbon footprint for 1,800 years. It's about 60 million cars coming off the road. That's both France and Australia, all the vehicles combined. Another way, I flew in from New York. This is the equivalent of a flight in terms of carbon emissions, New York to Paris, multiplied by the number of citizens in Canada, which brings us to the point. This is less than 400 entrepreneurs' work. They're early in their journey. And it reminds me of what Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, said, which is we should never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Our work at Unreasonable is about wrapping the courageous individuals who have dedicated their life's work towards a more regenerative and just future with a community of support that can take them to, and take all of us towards a better future. We really feel, I was a business school dropout. I ended up studying philosophy. I dropped out of business school because of the notion of having a competitive advantage really didn't resonate with me. I think that business in the 20th century was about having a competitive advantage. What we would say that we have learned is business in the 21st century, that the future titans of industry, the most successful investors, the most successful multinationals, the most successful foundations and entrepreneurs will be those who focus instead on having a collaborative advantage. I want to end this talk with how I started it, with just a debt of gratitude for your time, for your attention, for your minds, and for your hearts. And I hope that if you are so willing and you want to join us in supporting these brave entrepreneurs, that you do so. You can find me on LinkedIn. I would love to connect, and I am just very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you all so much. Thank you.